Sound familiar? This is a loop from Splice, and it was used in a summer hit song that's dominating the charts right now, which is Espresso by Sabrina Carpenter.
Now he's thinking about me every night. Oh, is it that sweet? I guess so.
The loop comes from the Oliver Power Tools 3-pack on Splice and is the Oliver 104 pop loop served that rhythm lead C.wave. Now, you may be surprised and be thinking to yourself, wow, did this riff really come from a sample pack? And that statement is true, but the true success of the song is a result of the production around the sample. Think, for example, of the great bass line we hear. But also of the extremely catchy songwriting and the amazing vocal production. And in a way, the sample selection is an art form in itself. Like, it definitely takes a great ear to identify what specific samples should be used, as there's thousands if not millions to choose from on a platform like Splice. Now, speaking of Splice samples, I want to play you another loop. And as you may be able to tell, this guitar loop was used in Friends by Marshmello and Anne-Marie.
Don't go look at me with that look in your eye.
The loop is the BPM 95 AM Acoustic Groovy 2.wave from the Prime Loops Melodic Guitar Hooks pack, which used to be on Splice but sadly isn't any longer. However, it's still worth discussing because this song got quite big as well, reaching over 1 billion streams on Spotify. And similar to Espresso, this really is another case of just dragging in a sample and not changing much apart from some subtle tempo and EQ tweaks. However, again, the success of this song is defined by the creative decisions surrounding the sample, such as choice of singer, lyrics, melody, and other instrumentation, like those signature Marshmello drums and the grungy guitar and 808 bass combo in the chorus, or the string melody that is introduced later in the song. Like, without considering these factors, the guitar loop on its own would probably not amount to the same success, even though the guitar definitely plays a big role as it does act as the anchor of the song. Now, third and finally, what about this sample? This dreamy lo-fi house loop, the SSL 115 lo-fi melody loop More Beautiful D.wave from the Lo-Fi House Sweet Sedation pack on Splice, ended up being used in the song 10 by Fred Again. But the difference between this and the two previous songs discussed is that Fred did tweak the sample quite a bit, making the sample slightly less recognizable than the loops discussed before. Fred chopped it up, added a little top melody on top of the loop, and like the others, flipped it into a cohesive song by incorporating a strong supporting bass line, drums, and vocals, which complement the sample extremely well. So the use of these splice loops in several famous songs got me thinking, should you use splice loops in your songs, or is using loops cheating? In my experience, many musicians and producers frown upon the thought of using splice loops in their songs as they feel it's unoriginal and uncreative. And in essence, they're right. You're basically using a piece of music that was made by somebody else, right? Now, I think the answer to whether you should use splice loops or not requires a little more nuance, as there are several pros and cons involved. First of all, loops can be used as an anchor to spark the creative process. Say you're not exactly sure how to begin a song, or you find yourself stuck within a section of a song, you can then just browse platforms like Splice to find countless loops and ideas that can be used to begin a section, or to even add an extra bit of flavor to your music that it may currently be missing. Or say you're a singer-songwriter and want to get an idea down, you can just drag in a cool Splice loop and start writing without needing to worry about production at all. And obviously doing all of this should definitely speed up the creative process as a result, helping you reach the finish line faster and therefore allowing you to make more music. So what about the cons? The biggest drawback I find when using a sample loop is that there's limited ability to tweak the sample. as you are restricted to a finalized audio file with all of its melodic choices and effects. And unlike a MIDI instrument, you can't really alter the melody easily from the audio, and it's quite difficult to control or strip the particular effects and nuances that have been applied to the sample. Now, there's also the burden of lack of originality when using a sample. If you use a loop that many people have access to, it's extremely possible that somebody else has already used that example in a song of their own. I mean, say we made a song using the exact same Splice loop that was used in Espresso. Would that pose any legal trouble? Venus Theory made a great video on this, talking about what's copyrightable as well as the legal implications of the scenario we just described. And he concludes that it's quite confusing and there's no clear-cut answer to the question at hand. It's all very complicated and confusing, but I'd still definitely recommend you to go watch Venus Theory's video after you finish watching this one. But even though there's no clear answer as to whether you are in legal trouble or not after using a loop that's been used before, we can all agree it's a tricky subject, so I'd like to suggest a creative solution to this. If you find yourself using a Splice loop that you really like, then you should try to recreate the loop at one point during the process. It'll prevent any future legal headaches that can come from directly using a Splice sample, as the recreated version will most likely end up sounding a bit different, and most importantly, you'll unlock unlimited flexibility when it comes to tweaking this sample or the recreated sample. As mentioned before, one of the major cons of using loops is that you're set in stone in a way. You just have a finalized audio file, but with your own recreated version of the sample, you're able to change any parameter of the loop. So let's actually head into FL Studio to see what this could look like. For the sake of this example, let's assume Espresso never came out and we wanted to use the Espresso Splice loop in one of our songs. Now, we can hear that the loop consists of a guitar lead, some funky guitar chords, some subtle keys, and some ambience effect in the background. So I already went ahead and recreated those elements. The lead, the chords, the keys, and the background ambience effect. And together they sound somewhat similar to the original Splice loop. Yet there is some level of difference, which is good because that means we've created our own unique version of the loop. And the best part is we can now fully customize and tweak any element of our loop according to our own preference. Say we want to change the melody to something else, then we can just do that. And say we also want to change the chords, both on the guitar and on the keys. No problem, because we can just change the MIDI, which we couldn't do before when we were using the WAV file from Splice. So as you can see, we were still able to use the Splice loop for inspiration, but by recreating it in our DAW, we were able to completely customize it. And to be honest, the challenge of recreating the sample was quite fun. Now, the point of this video was to highlight both the good and the bad of sampling, and especially of using loops, which is often seen as a sin, and we tend to be turned away by this, which often stems from ego. However, you of course will be aware that you've used a loop, but 99% of your audience won't know or care. I mean, take Espresso as an example. I bet there's plenty of people who don't listen to the song because they don't like it, which is a matter of personal preference. But I don't think there's a large number of people out there who refuse to listen to it because it uses a splice loop. And that's why we should try to let go of ego in our music and be receptive to how efficient music creation has become. Because like it or not, but sampling definitely creates lots of opportunities. And if you're skeptical about the cons of sampling or using loops, which I can definitely understand, then just exploit the pros only by recreating the loops and turning them into something unique, and thereby forgetting about the cons. That would be my personal advice. Now, with that said, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, as I feel we can have a strong discussion about this, whether you should or should not be using splice loops in your songs. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to become part of our community of musicians and music lovers, and I can't wait to see you next time.